All the way from New York, it's the beautifully crafted David Zellnik.
I arrived in Vienna last year, my first time as an Austrian citizen. And at a food festival, I make eye contact with a 6'5" blonde guy. I am 5'7". So that is 196 centimeters to my 171 centimeters. And I'm pretty sure he's cruising me, and I cruise him back. I'm married, but I always get curious in situations like this. And I'm not even really into tall guys, but I will say there is something intriguing about the idea of bringing down big game. Anyway, so we're probably cruising, we're at a food festival, and we non-verbally agree to sit at a table. And as he turns to sit, I see that he is wearing a yarmulke, a kippah, the Jewish prayer cap. And I go, oh my God, you're a Jew, I'm a Jew. What are the odds in Vienna? And I say, did you recognize that I was Jewish when you looked at me? And he said, kind of, maybe. And I was like, this is great. I've been wanting to meet other Jews in Vienna, so awesome. And we order beers. And to this point, I should tell you that my father was born in Vienna in 1931. And that he left Vienna as a refugee in 1939 from the thing that made Jews refugees in 1939. He left on the first anniversary of the Anschluss, and though I always knew he was from Vienna, he never really talked about it. And I never realized what an absence that was until I got older. Anyway, on my maybe a date, my questions are tumbling out. I'm like, have you been here long? What is the Jewish scene like here? I tell him, you know, my dad never really talked about Vienna and there's so much I want to know. And he said, yeah, that generation didn't really talk. And I say, is your family from here too? And he says, no, we're from Germany. And I go, oh, how did your family make it through the war? And I am worried they're survivors. And he's silent, so I say, did your family spend the entire war in Germany? And he says yes, and you can see I'm confused, and he alludes to something about God's providence. And it isn't like he was lying, but it is at this moment that it clicks. Oh, this man is a convert. I mean, there are 6'5" blonde Jews, they exist, but they're like rare. And Jewish converts are a thing. And we are one people. This is like central to the idea of Jewishness or Judaism. Whether you think of it as an ethnic group or as a religion, the idea of peoplehood is essential. That we are one people. That is the chorus of the core thing, even more than a belief in God. But I will say, and feel free to judge me, but I did think it was my job to accept him as a fellow Jew. Because I am 100% Jewish. I come from a long line of book-loving, arts-making, matzo ball-making Jews, and my great-grandfather was the choir director at the Stadt Temple here in Vienna, and there are rabbis in the family, so like, very, very Jew. So anyway, it's still going well. We're flirting. He's a bit more religious than I am. And then Israel comes up. Are we allowed to talk about Israel? Am I? I know there's a taboo in this country. I know your history. I know your history well. But just for a moment, let us imagine that we are all one people in this room. Okay? So I say, I have a very complicated feeling towards the state. And he says, yeah, but you're a Zionist, right? And I say, why do you ask? And he says, because we're Jews. We all need to be Zionists. And I say, why? And he says, look, I'm a left-wing guy. I believe in 2 states. I have worked with Palestinians, and even this is a little bit hard in Austria. And I say, look, I am not telling you how to be. And he says, wait, are you self-hating? And I say, I am entirely too narcissistic to hate any part of myself. I love Jews. My husband's Jewish, my best friend is Jewish, and I make a great challah, and I want Israelis to thrive, I want Palestinians to thrive, I want them all to live, but a Zionist? A follower of the political ideology that started here in Vienna? The ethno-nationalism that has been brutally implemented over the past 100 years? No, I am not. And he says, well, I don't understand that, and I can tell he is pissed. I remember the one moment my dad spoke about Vienna with feeling. I was 22, and I was on one of those Eurail travel to every city in Europe trips. And I landed in Vienna, and I called my parents collect. And by this point, I had learned a little bit of German. My dad never raised me with it, so I wanted to surprise him. So I call them, and I say, Dad, guess where I am? Ich bin in Wien angekommen. I am in Vienna. And he gets very quiet, and his breathing changes, and he says, Vienna. And I think, okay, now the stories will come out. Now there will be an opening. He'll tell me everything he didn't tell me. I will hear about how his mom sewed the yellow star on all his clothes. I will hear about the Jewish school he was sent to. I will hear about the benches in the first district that this 8-year-old kid was not allowed to sit in because they weren't for Jews. I'll hear about how the Nazis ripped the oil painting of a rabbi ancestor. He'll tell me about how his father had to sell the family business to Aryanize it. And maybe he'll even say, David, why are you there? Why are you in Vienna? But instead, he says in his truest voice, Vienna, isn't it glorious? And I realized Vienna wasn't a nightmare he had been repressing. It was a fairy tale he had been exiled from. And walking around the first district where he grew up, those cobblestones, I get it. I see it through the 8-year-old's eyes. I feel very protective of that 8-year-old my father was, as though he were a child and I was his father. And I think if my father had to make Vienna into a fairy tale in order to invent a new life, in order to have a family, then maybe it was my job as his child to be his anger. And that is why I said to this very nice, very well-meaning man, listen, I know what a Jew is, and it is not a 6'5" blonde whose family survived the war because they were German. I do not need to be lectured about Israel from someone whose grandparents might have been Nazis. You people do not get to kill us and then convert and replace us and become us. And he said, you people, I am a Jew. And I said, look at this face. This face you recognize as a Jew. I am a Jew. And he said, oh, you mean Jews are just Jews by blood? Who do you sound like now? And I said, ooh, I bet you've been waiting to call a Jew the real Nazi for years. And that was the end of the date. If it was a date. And I was left to wonder, religion or race, shared history or living culture. Anyway, when I came back to stay here for 4 months this year, I went to look him up to apologize, but he was gone. I've been spending a lot of time in cafes since I've been back, sitting and reading and writing. I have this idea that Vienna needs its Jews in cafes, that it needs Jewish artists in cafes, that somehow Vienna lost something essential about itself when we were driven out or murdered, and that it needs us. It needs these possibly charming, possibly annoying little people to argue with and make art. So, I guess you could say I have my own fairy tale visions of Vienna too. And I have cast myself, if not as the lead, then as the mysterious returning stranger with cryptic riddles and prophecies, half Dobby the house elf, half the witches from Macbeth. Of course, there are many roles to play in Vienna, and for that matter, there are many Viennas. And there are many kinds of Jews. My father never told me his story of Vienna. Thank you for listening to mine.